All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Training for Hiking live Q&A. My name is Rowan Smith, and I'm answering your questions around training and physical preparation for the trail. Now, as always, how these Q&As work is if anyone is watching this live, and if you do have any particular questions you would like covered on the topic of training or physical preparation for the trail, just pop them into chat and I'll do anything I can to help. Now, on top of that, I've also had a few questions sent through prior to this, which we're going to be working through and we're going to be covering. And essentially, the questions I've had sent through today, I've talked a little bit about metatarsal pain on longer hikes. We're going to be talking a little bit about pushing out of your comfort zone during training if you find you're at a bit of a plateau with things. And we're also going to explain a little bit around choosing weight versus range of motion inside of your strength exercises. So with that being said, let's get into it. So first question, we're talking about metatarsal pain. And the specific question was any advice on metatarsal pain? I spent the winter working out with strength training and treadmill and road walks. Once the snow was gone in my area in April, I started hiking each weekend. I'm now hiking up to 40 kilometers with 2,500 meters of elevation per weekend. Just last weekend, I started experiencing pain in my toes. It's hard to narrow down the pain, but it seems to be when I flex the toes and seem to be coming out of the third and the fourth toes. Once I'm done hiking, there is no pain. I'm taking this weekend off and icing and stretching. Has anyone experienced this? Any advice on dealing with it? I have 8 weeks left until my big hike. So first and foremost, when it comes down to any type of pain, obviously in the online context, it is a little bit tricky to give specific advice around this type of stuff because there's so many different factors going into it. And if you were really wanting some specific stuff going on, probably worthwhile booking in with a specialist, podiatrist, physical therapist, physio, whatever it may be, getting someone to poke around. Now, beyond that, there's a few sort of general bits and pieces which we can kind of look at, which can probably make a little bit of a difference here. Now, first thing that kind of jumps out to me in regards to this situation is hiking planning, in the sense that when it comes down to hiking about 40 kilometers per weekend, that to me sounds like a lot of hiking. And I fully understand if you really enjoy hiking, if it's something you really enjoy doing on your weekend and this and that. But the first thing that jumps out to me is when we are doing that type of volume every single weekend, um, that's often a risk factor when it comes to aches and pains. And it could be the most simple thing out there is if you're looking at this type of toe pain or foot pain, it may just be the volume of walking and the volume of hiking that you're doing. So considering you kind of have your 8 weeks until your big hike, there's a couple of different ways you could sort of look at here, which could be really simple ways of approaching this. Now, option number one, you may sort of put yourself in a situation where you can come up with a bit more of an undulating plan for your hiking. So as opposed to each weekend, you end up going and doing big kilometers and like really putting it out. Sometimes a really simple fix to that is basically coming up with a plan where week by week, you kind of go turn it into it as opposed to like a flat line if you're doing the same thing all the time, but a bit more of a wave form. And it can basically just end up being a really simple thing where it just gives the body a bit more variation, gives a little bit more room for recovery, and can really help. So in this particular example, you may sort of say, okay, if I'm looking at hiking every single weekend, maybe once every 3 weeks, I'm going to do my long distance stuff. I'm going to do round about 40 kilometers once every 3 weeks. If I'm intending to meet that more and more, that's kind of what I look at. Every 3 weeks, I look at a long hike. Then on the other weeks, you look at a medium distance hike and a shorter distance hike. So week one may be, I don't know, you do 20 kilometers over the weekend. Week two, you may do 30 kilometers over the weekend. Week three, you may do 40 kilometers over the weekend. And then go back 20, 30, 40. Just purely having that undulating approach can really make a big difference to helping this type of thing. And if you're looking as a long-term thing over the season of hiking, that can often work. Very simple, but can make a big difference. Now, alternatively, if you are building up to a specifically big hike in about 8 weeks, one other thing that sort of springs out to me, and a common mistake that a lot of people fall into, I'm not saying this is exactly you, maybe you enjoy hiking, there's things you want to be doing, yada, but quite often people will end up end up peaking with their training and peaking with their hiking way too early. Essentially, as a longer term training strategy, if we have a particular endpoint we're really trying to build up, and maybe we don't worry about too much about certain things we're doing beyond that, as a longer term training strategy, ideally, we kind of want to take the slowest possible approach to get us where we need to be in the long term. So for my hikers, when we're looking at, leaving, when looking at a particular big trip, typically I'll sit down, I'll come up with some planning, come up with some programming where we basically make sure we're not going to be ready for this trip 4 weeks prior. We're not going to be ready 6 weeks prior. We're not going to be ready 8 weeks prior, but ideally 2 to 3 weeks prior before the trip. That's when we kind of hit the maximum distances, the maximum difficulty where they're ready for their big hike. And the idea behind that, the slower we can approach things, the more chance the body has of adapting and getting stronger. And also on top of that, if we are doing week after week after week, trying to maintain this really, really high level of difficulty, it can sort of grind the body down a little bit. So your other option here is if you're like, hey, I'm getting a little bit of pain. It's concerning me. It's stressing me out. It's getting a little bit worried. And I do have 8 weeks until the big hike. Maybe worthwhile considering maybe just stripping things back a little bit temporarily and rebuilding to peak just before your trip. So what I mean by that is if you've got 8 weeks till your trip, you can get out a calendar. You can say in 8 weeks' time, I'm going to be on my trip. In 7 weeks' time, I probably want to have a bit of a rest week before I go out. In 6 weeks' time, I'm going to make sure that is the peak of my training. That's my longest, hardest hiking weekend. And if I can do that, I'm confident that I can go out on the trip. And then essentially you just work backwards, and between week 1 to 5, you kind of strip things back and start at a lower point and slowly build things up to get back up to this point. And it may feel like a little bit of a going backwards because you may not be doing 40 kilometers each week, but it can often be enough to give the body the space it needs to recover, give the body a space it needs to kind of bounce back, and still get you ready for the trip. So that may be something. So that's the first thing that kind of jumps out to me, just distance wise. I fully understand if you're in the middle of the hiking season, you like want to get out each week and make the most of it. In that situation, totally understandable. But if not, maybe worthwhile looking into that. A couple of other things to sort of look at when it comes down to this is any time we're looking at foot pain, one of the most simple things you can do to reduce pain out of the feet and reduce pressure out of the feet is when you're on the trail, just reducing your speed a little bit, and especially on the flats. Because when we're going a little bit quicker, when we're pushing the speed a little bit, the feet do take a little bit more force. So if we're trying to take force away from the feet, just pulling back our pace is really simple. Now, typically when we're going up hills, our pace will be managed by the steepness of the hill. Typically when we're going down hills, our pace will be managed by making sure we don't actually fall over. But all too often we'll get to the flat period and be like, hey, I've got a bit of flat. I'm going to make up a bit of time. And we end up just power marching along. Nothing wrong with that, but if you are picking up to make some pains in the feet, this can be a really simple thing. So maybe just giving yourself the cue that when you are on the flat periods on your hikes, pull back the speed a little bit, make it a little bit more casual, and that can often be enough just to take pressure out of the feet. And then finally, I would sort of say that's main priority. That's a simple thing that can kind of help. If you are still a little bit worried about this, then one thing that often we see when it looks into toe pain specifically does tend to come to a few factors of like how your foot is sitting in your footwear. And I've had clients in the past who, in a little bit of deeper investigation, their shoes haven't quite fit, or their boots haven't quite fit, or sat quite nice. And what ends up happening is their toes in certain situations on the trail, instead of just hanging out, their toes are like clenching in. And they basically just try to stop them sliding around and doing certain situations. And that's led to a little bit of pain. Now, that can often be quite difficult for us to identify personally because, it's a little bit, things going on. So if you were exploring this a little bit, and you're like, hey, I've got 8 weeks, I'm a little bit worried about my feet. If there is any possibility of you seeing a podiatrist, because podiatrists are the keys to people with feet, this can be really, really useful. Book in with a podiatrist, bring your footwear and bring what you wear during your hikes, and just say, hey, I'm building up to a hike. Give them the full context of this is going on. I'm getting pain here. This is my footwear, and they may be able to sort of look and give you some simple solutions. They may personally recommend different lacing and say, hey, you know what? That's fine. We can see this is going on. Your feet, your shoes are fine, but maybe if you lace your shoes in a slightly different way, that may reduce X, Y, and Z. Could be good. They may recommend, giving you different footwear and say, you know what, this isn't actually supporting your particular feet so great. And they may recommend going down a different avenue. Obviously, 8 weeks until your trip, that's not an ideal situation, but it may help. And then the other thing, they may give you some specific exercises and say, hey, you know what, you're getting foot pain because this particular muscle isn't doing its job or it's a little bit weak. Maybe we can give you some specific exercises. So that is a really good option. I fully understand if that's not accessible for you or you don't want to spend the money or whatever it may be. So one thing you can experiment with for yourself is just trying different lacing techniques. If you just go into Google and type in um, like if you're wearing boots, like hiking boot lacing techniques, see if there's anything in there we may be able to experiment with. If you're wearing shoes, you can type in trail runner lacing techniques, whatever it may be, and experiment with some other bits and pieces, and that may potentially help. Um, so hopefully that gives you a few ideas. I would sort of say definitely look at that if you can. Um, and even if you want to make the most of the summer or make the most of the weather, just definitely undulate things a little bit. Look at the speed and then potentially look into that. And hopefully something in there will make a bit of a difference. So, with that being said, next up, let's talk about pushing out of comfort zone during training. And this was more of a comment than a question, but it was something that I definitely thought worthwhile chatting through because it's a situation a lot of people get, especially when they're kind of doing their own training or they're training at home. They haven't got someone like standing over them or whatever it may be. And essentially, the comment was from someone we're working with who, sort of said, they've been working out pretty consistently, doing lots, but they sort of said, hey, haven't really pushed myself for quite a while. And I do feel like that I need for mental strength as well as physical strength, that I kind of need to push a little bit more on my workouts. And I find it is a little bit harder to push yourself um, during the workouts, and it's easier to kind of just go into what we're comfortable with. And realistically, this is a really, really common situation. Everyone falls into it. I fall into it. All of my clients fall into it. You've probably fallen into it as well. In the sense of when we're training and we're in a routine, we're being consistent, we're working through, it is really easy to kind of get in a comfort zone. In the sense, if we're doing a strength workout, we're doing relatively similar exercises or relatively similar workouts, we may end up just doing the same weight all the time. And we may squat with a certain amount of weight. And we're like, hey, this feels comfortable. I'm just going to come do this week after week after week. Or it may be cardio. You may be like doing pack walking and be like, hey, I'm just comfortable at a certain amount of weight and I just do that every week. Or maybe I do intervals and I just do the same speed every single week. Or maybe I go for a run and I do the same run every single week. Or whatever it may be. It is really, really, really common to just get stuck in the comfort zone. Now, if you're just training for general health and you're like, hey, I just want to generally be strong, generally be fit, this is fine. Just being in a good routine, just sitting in a thing and just being active, it's not a big deal at all. But if you are actively wanting to improve and you're trying to push the strength forward, you're trying to push the fitness forward, whatever it may be, we do want to give the body a little bit more of a challenge because doing the comfort zone stuff is fine. But for us to progress, we need to give the body more challenge to adapt and to stimulate it to change and move forward. The tricky thing here is the comfort zone. That's exactly what it is. Like we are comfortable with this, we're happy with this, and it can often be tricky to actually push out of this. Because sometimes we can sort of look at saying, okay, I'm really, I recognize I'm in the comfort zone. I recognize I'm doing the normal stuff that I'm always been doing. And we're like, you know what, actually, this week, this is the week where I'm going to kind of push things a bit more. For this workout, I'm going to really, really give it my all. I'm going to really, really go this. And, this can work for some people, but sometimes, when we're approaching it like this, we look at a whole workout, we look at like 30 minutes or 40 minutes or 60 minutes of training. And we're like, oh my gosh, I've got to do this whole workout and really push it. And it does feel a little bit tricky. You may look at an interval workout and be like, okay, I've been doing the same speed and I've got to push this whole workout quicker. Or maybe you're looking at run and you're like, hey, I do the same pace every single run. I do a 5 kilometers like this, but I'm going to push this 5 kilometers quick for the entire 5 kilometers. It can sometimes really feel overwhelming and it can be really difficult. Alternatively, sometimes we can actually push ourselves to do it. We're like, yeah, I'm going to get out of that comfort zone. I'm going to push it. I'm really give this workout. Then we come out the other end and we're like, well, it just felt like I've overdone things. Like I wanted to get out of that comfort zone, but now I'm in that uncomfort zone. I'm just not feeling good. I'm sore. I'm tired. I'm achy or whatever it may be. Not amazing. Not everyone falls into this situation, but it is common. If this is sounding familiar for you, a really, really good solution to this is if you're trying to push things out and just get things moving forward. Instead of considering, hey, I've got to push an entire workout, I've got to do a whole strength workout, every single exercise I've got to make harder, or I go to an interval session, every single interval I've got to go harder, just to choose one section of it where you intentionally push a little bit more. So in strength, instead of looking at the whole workout, every single exercise, you may say one exercise, I'm going to intentionally push. Everything else I'm going to do my usual, but I'm going to choose one exercise today where I'm going to push. Or for the intervals, you may say, I usually do 5 intervals. My 4 intervals, I'm going to do normal pace, normal speed, just go with it. For one interval of that, I'm really going to push it. I'm really going to try and get it up. Or if you're doing like steady cardio, if you're doing a hike, you may say, okay, instead of me trying to think for the entire 3 hours, 4 hours on the trail that I'm going to push my speed, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to choose a 20-minute section or a 10-minute section where I push it a little bit more, or whatever it may be. Sometimes breaking this up and just saying, hey, I'm going to target one little more thing, it can just be so much more achievable physically and mentally. And on top of that, if we can nail this, and this can go well, this can go successfully, this can feel good and make us feel positive, then next time it'll be easier. The next time will be easier. The next time we end up just getting better and better and better and better. And it ends up in a bit of a success loop. So if you do find that you're just stuck in a bit of a comfort zone and you do want to push out of it, but the whole thought of just doing an entire workout is a little bit much for you, just choose one element. I promise you it can make such a big difference. So with that being said, last question I've had sent through. I will also say, anyone who is watching live, if you did have any questions you would like me to cover, feel free to just plug them in the chat. I'm more than happy to help. Now, the final question was a question around a specific exercise, and it was basically asking like the difference between increasing weight or range of motion. So this particular question was asking about split squats, which if you're not familiar, split squats is like a lunge where we're just doing it in place. So essentially what we're doing, 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, coming all the way down, little pause, popping up. Really, really great exercise. A lot of hikers do it. Very, 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 very useful. Now, this particular question was basically sort of saying, hey, for the split squats, I first tried using 15-pound dumbbells. I could only really find I could squat part of the way, not even the floor. So in this situation, they were saying, hey, and I went down, I sort of got to here, and then I went back up again. I could only go like part way as opposed to all the way down. Then they said for the second set, I dropped the weight, so I used a little bit less, and I could do the full range of motion. And they're just asking, what's better? Is it better to go with a heavier weight and challenge myself with that, but not quite go as far, or do the full range of motion and not use quite as much weight? And this is a really common situation a lot of people find themselves in for strength training, and something that a lot of people will toss up. Because when it comes down to strength training, both increasing weight and increasing the resistance you're doing, and also increasing range of motion, are perfectly legitimate methods of progression. As we always say with strength training, progression over time is key to ensure we're getting stronger, improving, getting better for the trail. Over time, we're going to apply more and more and more challenge to the body, so it will adapt, so it will get stronger, so it will keep on moving forward. And both of these things are perfectly legitimate methods of progression. Now, for most of the time, when it comes down to exercises, if you're tossing up between, okay, should I add weight but do a shorter range of motion, or should I just do the full range of motion with a slightly less weight? I would sort of say the majority of the time, mastering a full range of motion is usually going to be better. There's a generalization, it's usually going to be better. So if we're looking at these split squats and lunges, I would sort of say getting a little bit deeper and a little bit lower to your capabilities is probably going to be better. Now, I fully understand some people realistically just cannot get that deep, and it's like, hey, that's just physically, I can't do it. But whatever the full range of motion is for you. So this might be for things like split squats, or if you're doing like push-ups or glute bridges or whatever it may be. And to give you an example on a glute bridge, let's pull this up just so I can show this to you. Like what I mean by that is some people, when they're doing glute bridges, full pushing all the way up and getting the hips up to this nice strong part here. Sometimes people will put too much weight in where they end up not being able to get up. They get up to like this point here, and they're like 3/4 the way through, but they're not quite there. Usually better to try to get the full range of motion. Most of the time, that's going to happen. Now, there are admittedly, some exercises where, there is the difference between a full range of motion and kind of a good range of motion, if that makes sense. So, for example, like squats, like, squat. Let's pull this up. Oh, I've got so many squatting exercises. Bear with me, bear with me, bear with me. It's not a great video, but I'll show you this one. So, for squats, like there is the option to do a normal squat, which may take us down to about like, say, here. Like that's about a range of motion with a squat. That as is a good goal for most people. Admittedly, we can keep on going a little bit further. You can get a bit deeper here, where it's just a little bit further down. And admittedly, you can go all the way down to the floor, and realistically, you can keep on pushing things. For some exercises, it's perfectly acceptable to go like a normal range of motion, like 90 degrees. Or if you're looking at like Romanian deadlifts, um, let's see if I've got this Romanian. Bear with me. Video. Or if you're doing like a Romanian deadlift, it's do a range of motion where you kind of end up, just below your knees there. But some people can go all the way down. So, when we're back to the main point, most of the time, working at the full range of motion and slowly increasing the weight is usually the way to go. So we start with that split squat, we work through it. Once we're comfortable with that, we add a bit of weight. Once we sort of like, can go through the full range of motion, once we're comfortable with that, we add a little bit more weight. We keep on adding on, adding on, adding on. Most of the time, that's worthwhile. Now, occasionally in the situation, it can be useful to reduce the range of motion and increase the weight temporarily. I wouldn't say this is a normal thing that most hikers would need to do, but it can be a legitimate option sometimes. Usually, this will happen is if you tend to be stuck at a plateau. So, similar to where we sort of said, sometimes we just get stuck doing the same thing over and over and over. Sometimes, if you're doing an exercise, you may have done it for 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it may be, and you've gotten to a point with an exercise and you're like, I'm just doing the same weight over and over and over, and I just cannot improve. If I do it a bit extra weight, I'm like, I just can't do that. It's a bit too much, and we're just stuck. So in that type of situation, a perfectly legitimate strategy would be to spend a temporary amount of time where you reduce the range of motion but increase the weight. So if we use the squats for an example, you may say, okay, I've been doing these goblet squats for, let's say, 6 weeks. And I've gotten to a weight where I'm like, hey, I can do this and this range of motion. It's all good. And I'm working with that. And this is all good. I'm working this, but I can't really get any further. Then you may say for 4 weeks, I'm actually going to reduce it down to like a 3/4 squat, but I'm going to increase the weight pretty significantly. I'm going to challenge the body, challenge the muscles, and get it exposed to this heavier weight for 4 weeks. And then the idea behind that, you may do that for 4 weeks, and then after 4 weeks, you'd go back to the full motion and you go back to going all the way down. And the idea behind that is by the time you get back to it, the body's adapted, got a little bit stronger, and you can actually use a bit heavier weight. It's an option that people use to push through a bit of a plateau. Perfectly legitimate, a little bit legitimate option. The only thing you need to be aware of if you're going about this is you do need to approach this intentionally. It's not something that I would recommend that you're like, hey, today I'm just going to do this, or when I feel like I'm going to do this, but actually have a bit of a plan of attack, because it's very, very, very easy to get stuck doing that reduced range of motion. In the sense that, sometimes we can say, okay, I've been doing these squats and I was doing 5 kilos and I could do 5 kilos all the way down and this and that. And then I was in the situation where I was like, I reduced the range of motion, but I went up to 10 kilos and I was doing this range of motion here. And that felt really good. But then you might be like, okay, I don't really want to go back down to 5 kilos, or I don't really want to go to 7 kilos or 8 kilos. I feel like I'm going backwards. And then we end up just doing this over and over and over and over. And that's probably not ideal if we're only training is reduced range of motion. It's a very, very easy trap to fall into just mentally. We don't want to feel like we're going backwards if we don't have a plan. On top of that, over the long term, this can sometimes actually have a negative impact in our mobility. When it comes down to mobility and going through a range of motion, initially you may be able to do this full range of motion. This may be accessible for you, and you're like, hey, cool, and we can work with this. But then you fall into the situation for 6 or 8 or 10 weeks. I only do this half range of motion, and then all of a sudden, after 10 weeks of this, you can't actually go deeper anymore. You've kind of like you sort of like gotten a bit tired, you've gotten a bit stiffer, and you can't actually get that deep anymore. Then that range of motion ends up being a little bit difficult to access, and there's this whole like use it or lose it situation. So long story short, if you're going down that situation, have a plan, have a set timeline, be intentional, and be aware that, hey, I'm going to go backwards, but it's, one step forward, 2 steps backwards. It's a little bit more technical on the strengthening side of things, but, hopefully that helps. So, with that being said, those are all the questions that I kind of had sent to prior to this. And if there's no questions coming through the live chat, we may wrap things up there. So, as always, if anyone watching this in the future did have any follow up questions of anything I've covered today, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to explore it. On top of that, if you did have anything you did want to sort of come me to cover on these calls or on these streams, please let me know. Send it through. Happy to talk through things in as much detail as you want. But all in all, hope people watching this in the future have enjoyed it. Any questions for all this, please let me know. Hope everyone has a lovely day.